Thank you for the invitation. I'm really, happy to be here and to share with you, my experience, because what I will be sharing with you is not just theory, but also my life. Okay, I've been in this life for the past 32 years as an educator. I've taught basically from primary up to higher education, so I bring in a lot of practical experience as well as obviously theoretical and intellectual preparation. As you can see, the title of today's lecture is Adult Education for Social Change, a Viable Option. So I'll be focusing not on primary, not on secondary, so not on compulsory education, but my focus will be adult education. And a very particular adult education indeed, because we're talking here about adult education for social change. Now, in terms of social change and in terms of adult education, there are different theories, there are different routes to adult education, there are different routes to social change. So I think the best thing to do to start with is basically to declare my interests. And this is the kind of social change and adult education I'll be talking about. Epistemologically, it's a social justice-oriented kind of, adult education. So as far as I'm concerned, if you look at my biography, if you look at my writings, if you look at my actions within the community, at university and elsewhere, you see a total commitment to social justice. So that's where I'm coming from. So it's a very particular adult education. It's not hairdressing, it's not nail polishing, okay? It is adult education for social change. So basically, epistemologically, social justice involves critique of the world that is and action to transform it to a world that is not. So anyone interested in entering this route, adult education for social change, has to be committed to understanding the world, to reading the world. You cannot change anywhere, anything, unless you understand it first. Okay, so it is a lifetime commitment towards understanding, the world. You need a deep knowledge of what is happening around us before you can commit yourself to, changing the same world. So yes, adult education for social change combines a reading of the world with action on the world. So adult education for social change is not just happy with reading and learning about the world and understanding the world, but it's also committed to change. So this is how we perceive transformation. The combination, the welding of a commitment to understanding the world plus a commitment to acting on the world. So any adult education program in this perspective will have these two elements. There's no adult education for social change unless there is an element of action and there is an element of consciousness building and therefore understanding which is informing action. So these are the two words that come together when we talk about adult education for social change as we understand it from a social justice perspective. Remember, this is not any adult education. This is not any adult education for social change, but it's social change from a social justice perspective. Pedagogically, therefore, educators need to promote voice and experience of people, not to act on their behalf or to fix them. So there is this collective element pedagogically. There is this communion element of adult educators working with rather than working for. Okay, so we're not saving anyone. We're not the return of the Messiah here that we're talking about. Okay, we're here to talk with, to act with, to understand with. So the term with is a very important pedagogical element in a pedagogy of adult education committed to social change. Okay, so there is this interactive element. There is this engagement with the other. Engagement with the community. It's not just it's not just transmission, okay? That is a pedagogy that is obviously not acceptable from this point of view, okay? So it's collective action, collective understanding, and therefore collective transformation, including transformation of the educator himself or herself. So the educator, the adult educator within this perspective does not enter education with the view of transforming the other, but with the view of acting in communion with the other in a process which transforms not only students, not only participants, but also the educator himself. So it's a totally different ballgame than simply transmission of knowledge, or covering of content, or giving skills to the other. It's a totally different understanding of adult education, as I said, from a social justice perspective. Now, as I said, I will not lecture on this world because I don't have the time. I usually spend hours and hours and hours, interacting with students. But obviously, because adult education for social change is rooted in the world, is rooted in the concrete world, is rooted in the historicity of the world, then obviously we have to be present in the world. So adult education for social change is very much present in the materiality of this world. And we need to understand the world around us in order to be able to then act collectively to change the world. So I'm not going to enter into very many details, but I have to say that there are 4 points in which adult education for social change is operating. One is, as I'm referring to it here, a legitimacy crisis in this world. In other words, millions of Europeans, I will focus on Europe, not on Estonia here. Millions of Europeans are feeling that the state has abandoned them. So there is an antipathy with the state. And adult education for social change has to operate within this context where the state is unfortunately losing its legitimacy. Because obviously people are feeling that the social contract that was written right after the war has been betrayed. So people are alienated. And this is the kind of context that we work in. Because there is this antipathy, because there is this tension between citizens and the state, there are more boots on the street, there is more police on the street, there's more surveillance around us, and there's more military. So the state is becoming also violent. So unfortunately, right now, the amount of violence that the European state is showing is on the increase. So it's a violent situation that we are going through. And sometimes it erupts, and we see them on European streets, battling police, battling the military, etc., etc., etc. There is alienation. We hear that, the economy is recovering all over Europe, but obviously recovering for who? And adult education for social change has to operate within this context marked, by alienation. It's true that money is coming back. It's true that GDP is on the increase. But at the same time, poverty in Europe is on the increase. 118 million people in the European Union living, close to poverty or below the poverty line. And Estonia is no exception, as I'm going to see. I'll show you. So there is alienation. People are not feeling part of this recovery. And adult education for social change, committed to change the situation, is facing this kind of alienation. People feeling alone. People feeling that the recovery is not for them. People feeling alienated from the rest. And this is obviously a metaphor for that. So this is a graph. I'm not going to enter into details, but if we think that Europe is recovering for everybody, this is obviously statistics from NSO UK showing the level of poverty, and Estonia is up there, if you may not know, close to 23% of people in Estonia living close to poverty. And this is an interesting slide for you. You have marked 3% increase GDP every year for the past 3 years. So this is the contradiction that you are living here. And it's no exception. My country is living through the same contradiction. So GDP is on the increase, wealth is being created, 3% is being created more every year, and yet the number of people living in poverty here is on the increase. So these are the kind of contradictions that adult education for social change okay, is committed to uncovering. Okay? As you can see, had the state not intervened in your country, around almost 39% will be living not in relative poverty, but in absolute poverty. So if you think that there is no place for the state in the 21st century, there you get the answer from Estonia. Not from Africa, not from Brazil, but from Estonia, here, right next to you. Okay? The state intervening, did not intervene, the rate of poverty will go up to 39%. So these are the situation that I'm talking about, that obviously adult education for social change is committed to. Alienation. So while people are feeling alienated, okay, while people are feeling discarded, obviously there is alienation in terms of communication. We think that through communication we are connected, but obviously what communication is doing also in contradiction, it is disconnecting people. So whilst we are talking about the importance of, you know, communality, the importance of collectivity, the importance of sociality, the importance of working together towards social change, obviously, we're thinking that communication is connecting us, but obviously most of the time it's giving us this illusion, okay, that we are connected, whilst in fact we are losing slowly but surely our capacity to mobilize, our capacity to obviously work together. And in education then you have this culture of performativity, this culture of individuality, which is epitomized in PISA studies, okay? Performativity per excellence. So you have these contradictions that any adult educator for social change will have to understand. Okay? On one hand, we're talking inclusion in education. On the other hand, we are glorifying performativity, individuality, competitiveness, etc., etc., etc. So adult educators committed to social change have to unravel, okay, these contradictions. One of the worst things that is happening, and obviously I travel extensively all over the world, is the sense of helplessness, the sense of fatalism. There is nothing we can do. The world is much bigger than us. We are too small to act. And this is one of the biggest hurdles, problems, roadblocks that any adult educator for social change, okay, is facing. The sense of helplessness, the sense of fatalism, the sense that there is nothing we can do. So fatalism erodes this capacity to do, to act, to understand, to move together and act collectively. So fatalism is another point that we have to work with in this area. Interstate alienation. A year and a half ago, I was asked to interact with 13 heads of state, okay, on the concept of social Europe. Your head is here, okay? She was there, round table, and I spent 2 hours with them. And 2 things that I realized from this very important meeting in my biography. One, okay, is the, obviously, the gaps that exist between different parts in Europe. So there's no, okay, there's no real, okay, collective understanding, sorry, and there's no real, you know, union in terms of collective action. And you see it in migration. Migration is an area where obviously my country is very much involved in, and you see, okay, countries scrambling against each other to keep people out of Europe. So that is one that came out of this meeting, the interstate alienation, but also this concern with populism, okay? And that is an area, obviously, where adult education for social change is working, okay, to resist. But obviously, populism is not coming down from the sky. Populism is a symptom. Populism is growing because people are feeling alienated and betrayed, okay, by traditional, okay, parties, politicians, etc., by the establishment. So populism has to be understood in terms of being the predator coming in an area where millions are feeling that they have been isolated and betrayed by the establishment, and where the social contract that was signed basically after the war has been obviously contradicted. So basically, to sum up, okay, one very important beginning in the area of adult education for social change is the way we understand the world. And the way we understand the world is not just economic, social, and cultural, but it's also pedagogical. The way we present the world, the way we fabricate understanding of the world. So there is this situation going on. So education, okay, plays a very important part in it, because obviously, if you're committed to this area, you're committed to consciousness raising. I spoke about earlier on the importance of understanding the world in order to act the world. You cannot simply act on the world without understanding the world. So consciousness building is a very important adult education moment in this area of action. And therefore, education plays a very important role in the transformation of the community, in the transformation of the world. And that's where education or adult education comes in. Also, adult education calls for a commitment. Which side are you on? This is my obsession with the 32 years of teaching thousands of students. I will not let them leave my course without committing themselves. You need commitment. First of all, you need to understand yourself. You need to understand who you are, and then commit yourself. Which side of the Rio Grande are you when faced with these situations? And that's why, you know, adult education for social change is not a neutral endeavor. You have to commit yourself. And this commitment is essentially an ethical and moral choice, like any other types of education. Education is never neutral. Education is moral. Education is ethical. And therefore, it's very important for us all here, okay, to interrogate our morality, to interrogate our ethics. And deciding which side are we on is part of this process, okay, of interrogation. So adult education for social change, like any other type of education, is not neutral, is not innocent, but it's essentially an ethical and moral act. And because it is an ethical and moral act, therefore, it calls on us to make a commitment, a value system commitment, an ethical commitment, a moral commitment. We cannot enter this field, or we cannot enter any field in education thinking that our job is a neutral job. No. Education involves ethical choices, moral choices. And because it involves ethical and moral choices, it is never neutral. So this is a very important question that I ask continuously my students in my interaction with thousands of students in the past 30 or so years. So it also involves interrogating our self-perception. So when you interrogate your self-perception, another educator committed to social change will see himself or herself as an engaged public intellectual. We're not talking institutions here. We're not talking about private spaces here. We're talking about public spaces. And that obviously explains why I'm often on the media, all kinds of media, and in very different, public spaces, because I see myself not only as the academic in the ivory tower called university, but also obviously I have to work within university, I have to excel within university, but I'm also committed to be present in public spaces, engaging with different peoples, different publics, different communities. So my self-perception of an academic rooted in adult education for social change is the concept of, the educator as a public intellectual. The educator committed, to engaging with the public. And the public could be any public. It could be the general public, it could be specific communities, it could be oppressed communities. You have to be present, You have to be present and engage with people. The view of the other needs to be interrogated. How do we see, the other? How do we engage with the other? So basically, there are two ways, if I need to summarize, there are more ways of looking at the other. You can see the other as deficient, lacking, incomplete, needy, passive, and you walk into this hall, okay, you are all tabula rasa, and I'm going to pour, my information, my wisdom onto you. This is the view of the other as a deficient other, the deficit model of education, the salvation model, the Messiah model, etc., etc. That is one way of perceiving the other. The other choice, and I hopefully went for this one, is the idea of, education in dialogue with the other. The education that enables us, the education that sees the student, the participant, as co-producer of knowledge, rather than simply consumer of knowledge, the co-investigator, the active inquirer, etc. So this type of adult education calls for a self-interrogation of how we view the other in our engagement with the other. Because the way we engage with the other obviously requires, before that, an ethical choice. If I decide to pour information onto you, if I see you as a consumer and full stop, that means I am here to colonize you. I am here to invade you. I am here to domesticate you. And that is anything but liberatory education. That is anything but, education for freedom, emancipatory education. So obviously, we need to be aware that there could be contradictions between our vision and our pedagogy. And that is where we have to interrogate. So I've seen many of my colleagues preaching liberatory education, but then their pedagogy is very, transmissive. You cannot have this contradiction. You have to be a witness, a concrete witness, because that's what students will be looking for. And the best role models are those who model their talk, who walk their talk, as we say in English. So this is a very important moment in the formation of adult educators committed to social change, interrogating the way they view the other. Now, this is adult education, but epistemologically, it's the same with primary, it's the same with secondary, it's the same with any level of education. The way you view the other is the way you're going to behave with the other, And there are moral choices that need to be made in terms of pedagogy. See the link between pedagogy and morality? They are intimately linked. You do not invade the other because ethically, you are committed to engaging with the other, to co-producing with the other, to co-discovering with the other, etc. So these two elements have to be in sync with each other. The oppressed as the protagonist. So this is a very important commitment as far as adult education is concerned. Unfortunately, I've been to several communities working with all kinds of people where the educator is the protagonist. You should see, this situation. It's a situation where the educator goes in to the community, thinks that he is saving, but basically what he's doing there is self-serving. So a self-serving intellectual, a self-serving educator is anything but an adult educator for social change. So within this dimension, the community is the protagonist. And you are there, to facilitate a process. And you are there, in a relationship which is governed, defined, molded, informed by reciprocity, mutuality. As I said earlier on, you enter that community with the idea that the process of co-investigation, the process of dialogue, the process of collective action will transform you as much as it transforms the community. So this is an act, a pedagogical act, an educational act, where the community is collectively transformed. And we as educators are not outside the community, but inside the community. And because we are inside the community, this is a process of mutual and reciprocal transformation. Okay, so you see the dynamics are changing here. The commitments are very different. The ethics and morality are very different than the transmissive approach to education, any education. So let me reinforce what an adult educator for social change is committed to before I move on to the pedagogy. So basically, you cannot declare that you are an adult educator for social change unless you have a critical perspective of the world. So critique, the language of critique, is an important aspect, okay, of the characteristic of an adult educator for social change. There is no adult education for social change unless there is a commitment towards critique. And this is not something that you gain in 2 years course at university. This is a lifetime commitment, okay? So this is not something that you get solely from the formality of the institution. This is something that you get, okay, through your life as an adult educator. And what I need to say here is and highlight is the importance of experience as knowledge. So it's not just scientific knowledge, okay, that comes into this equation of knowing. Knowing through experience is knowledge, is important knowledge also. So it's not just glorification of scientific knowledge that we're talking about, quoting this and this, but it's also experiential knowledge that we gain through our engagement with people. So experience as knowledge. And this is very, very important. That needs to be celebrated and affirmed within this equation. Rejects the idea that education can never be neutral or objective. I think I'm repeating myself there. So an education which is not interested in or curious about what is happening around, it is oppressive. So we cannot enter this field of adult education for social change, as I said, unless we are curious about the world. And not being curious about the world is basically engaging with an oppressive world. We started off by giving statistics, okay, very few statistics of what is happening around us. Okay, that is a very superficial reading, okay, of Europe right now. I can go much, much deeper, but it is an indication, okay, of where we are. Not outside the continent, but inside, right next to us, okay? So basically, not being interested in the world is basically playing ball with the world. So not being curious, not engaging with the world critically, is basically contributing to an oppressive world. That is the understanding, obviously, from this point of view. An education which is not willing to risk is worthless. So an adult educator for social change is one who is committed to risk. As Giroux would say, living democratically is living dangerously all the time. Why? Because you are engaging. If I take myself as an example, I'm always creating knowledge through research which goes against the grain, showing governments, showing authorities that they are wrong in their analysis. Okay? So that is something which is not comfortable, okay, from my perspective to do, but it is an important activity, okay, which is part and parcel of my, okay, vision of adult education for social change, creating what we refer to as counter-discourse, creating what we refer to as counter-information. There's a lot of, fabrication going on around us, giving us false impressions, giving us illusions, giving us delusions about the world. As an adult educator committed to social change, as an academic, this is my role, to create counter-information, to create counter-discourse. And therefore, okay, in the process, there is some risk, okay, depending obviously on which context we're talking about. So we're not living comfortably. We are living dangerously, as Henry Giroux would say regarding democracy. Educators are more than technicians. Some of you are teaching, I believe, in primary and secondary, okay? I am involved in teacher training. Unfortunately, globally, okay, and internationally, teachers are being de-skilled, and they are becoming more and more technicians of the state. You have the syllabus, you have the content, okay? In certain parts of the world, including the developed world, they give them schemes of work, they give them lesson plans, and every single week, okay, they have to follow the plan. It's not that plan, it's not their plan, okay, it's the state's plan. So basically, any teacher working, okay, in primary and secondary, before entering this area of adult education for social change, has, okay, to unlearn most of, the formation that he or she would have been working on. The idea of covering content, following a plan, etc., etc., etc. So teachers or educators within this field are not simply technicians. They are not covering knowledge. They are not covering syllabi. They're not covering plans. Okay? Every community presents its own challenges. Every community presents its own realities. So adult education for social change will have to work with communities. And that's where the curricular experience comes in, starting off with the realities obtaining within particular communities. Considers ethics as central to the education process, I will not repeat myself, looks for new forms of knowledge and wisdom. So may I repeat this point because this is very important, okay? Within this realm, within this particular adult education, it's not just scientific knowledge that is celebrated, that is affirmed, but it's also, as I said, experiential knowledge, what we refer to in English as intuition. There's a lot of knowledge that is not affirmed within the community. So basically, pedagogically, we are committed for the community to bring out, okay, that knowledge, because that is the curricular experience of this particular adult education. Now, bringing that knowledge out does not mean necessarily romanticizing it, because I know that there is a lot of racism out there, and that knowledge cannot be just celebrated. It has to be interrogated. But yes, let it come out, and let it be interrogated. Let it be challenged. Let it be questioned, because unless we confront our racisms, unless we confront our homophobia, our sexism, etc., we can never grow in terms of consciousness and in terms of, working for a better world. So definitely there is this intuition, there is this understanding that knowledges rather than one single knowledge ought to be affirmed. And that includes experiential knowledge. Considers educators as transformative intellectuals. And this is a very important term, transformation, that is central, okay, to this type of adult education. So by transformation here, I repeat myself, I mean the welding of reading the world and acting on the world. So that's how we may refer to as transformation. Promotes equity and agency through the languages of critique and possibility. And this is very important here, okay, speaks the language of hope. And this is a very important, term which cannot be taken lightly. This is not a slogan. This is a commitment. This is a philosophy. As I said, wherever I travel around the world, I can feel a sense of fatalism. I can feel a sense of hopelessness, a sense of helplessness. Okay? And this is what, adult educators for social change are committed to, bringing back hope where there is hopelessness, bringing back hope where there is this sense of impossibility. So hope here, okay, is an ontological commitment. It's not frivolous, okay? And how do you bring back hope? Through talk, No, through understanding, but also through action. Concrete action. This is why hope can only come out of our understanding of transformation, which is a commitment to understanding, but also a commitment to action. So any curricular experience, okay, that unfolds within, okay, this adult education realm, obviously has to have an action component. Otherwise, if it's just talk, if it's just understanding, the fatalism will persist. So it's hope through experience. The language of possibility combined with the language of critique. Adult education for social change also intervenes at three different levels. I will not go through them in detail because I have obviously a lot left to say, but obviously these are 3 very important levels that we need to understand in order to engage with change, in order to engage with transformation. The personal level, of course, how can I move into an area carrying my sexism, carrying my racism, carrying my homophobia, carrying on my ethnic, antipathy, etc. So adult education for social change calls for ongoing interrogation of the self, okay? And that is the biggest challenge that I put forward to most of my students, thousands of them in the past 30 years. We need to interrogate ourselves ongoingly because we carry our prejudices, and we cannot engage with the other when unconsciously, okay, unconsciously we are prejudiced against the other, okay? And that happens very often, okay, in our engagements with children, with youth, with adults, etc. I've had research showing that, that teachers in primary, so let me go down to primary, thinking that, this is not their place. They are far beyond, okay, the place they are teaching. They are middle class, this area is working class, this is not for them. How can you engage productively in a classroom and in community when you have this prejudice? When you feel that you have been betrayed by the authorities when they send you in that place, okay? So this is what I mean, constant interrogation of the self. We all carry, okay, these prejudices, and we have to be consciously aware of these prejudices. And we can become consciously aware by constantly interrogating ourselves. Who are we? What do we stand for? What is the information, the knowledge that informs us and informs our action? Then there is, of course, cultural, okay, taken for granted, okay, areas. Okay, we know, for example, my country has one of the lowest, okay, female participation in the world of work. No revolution, no rioting. Why? Because obviously patriarchy reigns supreme, okay? And many men feel that women should be at home. So there's no rioting there. There's no revolution. It's taken for granted. It's cultural. So if we want transformation, we have to interrogate, the culture, the taken for grantedness, what we refer to in more sophisticated terms, hegemony. Okay, it's the normalization of certain ideas. Okay, that our country is Catholic, that our country is white, that our country, is patriarchal, etc. These are taken for granted, and they need to be interrogated at the cultural level. Then, of course, there is the other level, which is structural. Why do working class children all over the world underperform as compared to middle class children? Is it genes? Is it nature? Is it divinity? It's all rubbish. It's mostly structural. Schools are structured, okay, for middle class children to outperform working class children. So these are the kind of interrogations, okay, that need to go on. Otherwise, they remain normalized. Otherwise, we are reproducing the status quo. And that is not part of the, genetic makeup or programming of an adult educator for social change. So we need to interrogate at different levels, at the personal level, at the cultural level, as well as at the structural level. The importance of voice in our pedagogy, okay? Look what is happening right now. I know, it's the occasion. Silence, okay? So transmission has this effect of silencing the other, of promoting the culture of silence, which is not the case with adult education for social change. Adult education for social change promotes the concept of voice, of interaction, of engagement. And it's not just one voice, the voice of the educator, but it's the voices of the community. So we see, okay, learning as happening within communities of learning and communities of practice. We speak community, not class. Okay? And by community, I mean community engagement. So voice for us is a very important term, okay? Because it challenges the traditional approach, okay, to teaching, where you have one voice, okay, showering knowledge onto the other, who is basically silent, listening, consuming the knowledge of the professional expert other, okay? This is a very important moment, okay, transformative moment, the choice of pedagogy. Pedagogy is not neutral. Pedagogy has nothing to do with tradition or history. Pedagogy is ideological. So when I transmit for hours, and I can talk to you to death, as you can see, okay, for hours, I don't have any problem talking, okay? I'm Mediterranean. So I have no problem. But obviously, I'm not feeling comfortable because this is not my way of engaging with the other, okay? Engagement means the other needs to speak, needs to relate, needs to narrate, needs to engage, etc. So the concept of voice is a very important concept in adult education for social change. Consider the production of knowledge as power. We always talk about empowering the other, as if we're giving power to the other. You don't give power to the other. Okay? Empowerment means, okay, power in process. You empower yourself by engaging, and not by giving you the permission to talk at the end of this lecture. No. So empowerment, okay, is engagement in action. There is no power, there is no empowerment unless there is engagement. Okay, unless there is engagement. So these are two very important, concepts. Obviously, when we talk about adult education for social change, we're not talking most of the time about institutions. Any space can be an adult education for social change space. It could be the community, it could be home, it could be friends, it could be also institutions, why not? But obviously, we need to think in terms of a network of spaces that can contribute, okay, to adult education for social change. Yes, you cannot be an adult educator for social change unless there is an element of subversion, okay? You cannot be a person of the status quo, okay, and speak of yourself as an adult educator for social change, all right? So subversion, an element of subversion, obviously is needed in order to obviously be able to be effective in this realm. Language. I will not speak about Estonia, okay? You have your own issues with language, but we also have our issues with language. We are officially bilingual, so we have English as one of the official languages, but we also have Maltese, which is a Semitic language, the only Semitic language that is written in the Latin script. Now, if you look carefully, I will not go into history, but I will look right now in the present, you will see that language is a social marker. English for the middle class, Maltese for the working class. And you know that although Maltese is the national language of the country, the language of power is not Maltese, but it's English. So many students in primary, in secondary, lifelong learning have been debarred from education just because of language. So language can be a very divisive, okay, instrument indeed. So language here is obviously an important issue, all right? And I cannot enter certain communities in my country unless I have a very good command, not of English, but of Maltese, okay? So that explains why I spent so many years translating important, documents, books, etc., in Maltese, because I know I cannot enter certain communities with English as the main language. So people entering this realm have to be very sensitive, okay, to the use of language, because language can reproduce, okay, power, language can reproduce division, etc. And we cannot enter any community unless we are very much, okay, aware of the language use, because obviously we are for interaction rather than for transmission. Okay. I will skip this, and I will spend some time, the very little time that I have left, on a few elements of the agenda before I conclude with a very important slide. So what is in general the agenda here? So we talked about pedagogy, we talked about the moral choices, we talked about, interrogating the different levels. Now let's conclude by sharing a few, I don't have the time, a few elements of the agenda for adult education for social change. So recognizing adult education as a committed endeavor. Okay, so there is commitment here. Okay, and it's very clear commitment. Okay, if I were to choose, my preferential option would be obviously for the most disadvantaged. That would be my view. Recognizing adult education as hopeful and possibilitarian in nature, recognizing adult education as resistant. These are all elements that came out in my presentation, so I will not belabor the point. Also recognizing participants as intellectuals. This is a very important, and it's not just rhetoric, okay, to catch your attention. So wherever I go, this is where I start with. Because obviously, you cannot develop a community unless you respect the community. And that's where respect starts. By engaging with the community, recognizing the community, and recognizing the members in the community as intellectuals, people who can think. That is very important moment. Some members in the community won't take you seriously, especially if you're coming from university, okay, where they are obviously used to the expert coming in and giving them information, but that is where we start. Recognizing the other as an intellectual other, recognizing the other as a person who can think profoundly, who has been barred for many years from reflecting. So we cannot engage with the other in a reflective situation unless we respect the other as an intellectual, as a person who can think deeply, who can think creatively, who can think critically. And that is a problem which starts from very early in the age. You might have the best results in PISA, but I will beg, okay, to differ when it comes to creative thinking, critical thinking, etc., which are the higher order intellectual skills. Okay? So, yes, that's where we start. Education as a social good. Globally, unfortunately, slowly but surely, it might not be the case with Estonia, education is becoming increasingly a private good, a product that you buy, a product that you sell. So basically, adult education for social change is about recovering the process of education as a social good, as a communal good, as something that we ought to benefit and have access to, and not the privatization of education that we are seeing globally. I have to rush because obviously I'm running out of time. This is very important. This is something that obviously we are trying to push not only in the adult education sphere, but also in primary and in secondary. We cannot expect, an intellectually developed community unless we target higher order cognitive skills. So we're talking about the rational element now, okay? Forget about the social, forget about the emotional, etc. We're focusing here on the cognitive, experience of human beings. So by higher order skills here, I mean creative thinking, critical thinking, critical inquiry, okay, interdisciplinarity. These are the very higher order skills that are needed if we want to engage profoundly with the community around social, economic, cultural issues, etc. So this is obviously done consciously as far as cognitive skills is concerned. A permanent process involving a shift in consciousness. So we cannot start doing something unless, okay, we realize what is happening around us. So we cannot realize what is happening around us, we cannot engage in this shift in consciousness unless we address the higher order cognitive skills. Okay? as opposed to the lower cognitive skills, where basically transmission is the realm, where the absorption of knowledge is the realm, where regurgitation of knowledge is the realm. So these go together. A shift in consciousness realized by engaging the higher order cognitive skills. Okay, the biographical, the indigenous, the hybrid, okay, powering and enabling. So if we are not interested in the community and its biography and its knowledge, then we are out of the game here, okay? Because obviously indigenous knowledge, knowledge that comes out of the community, knowledge that is biographical is very important. We cannot interrogate each other, we cannot challenge each other's knowledge unless we touch on each other's biography, okay? So if we are allergic and we think that these are private realms, this is not the place for us. Because obviously, in our engagement, biography is being highlighted all the time. Indigenous knowledge is being produced. Why? Because we respect that knowledge. It's not just scientific knowledge that is validated within this realm, okay? Obviously, adult education that engages the elite and dominant cultures. Also, we are not shy of challenging dominant knowledges. It's not just indigenous knowledge that we are here. Emotional intelligence, and then I start skipping, okay? Adult education for social change, of course, addresses the rational, but it's also addressing the emotional. I keep saying that we cannot act unless sometimes we are angry. When anger is channeled positively, that's where we start doing something, okay? So the emotional dimension is a very important dimension, not only for adults, but also for children at primary, at secondary, wherever, okay? We're talking about holistic development, usually, and that includes the emotional dimension as much as it includes the rational dimension of human beings. So emotional intelligence is a very important dimension that is obviously a characteristic of this particular adult education. The collective dimension, okay? There's no such thing called adult education for social change unless we promote, okay, this communality, this idea that we're doing things collectively, together, in communion with each other. So adult education for social change, the way I see it at least, is committed to bringing back this sense of collectivity, this sense of togetherness, the power of being together. I will skip these, there's a lot, and I will go to conclude for actions. Okay, so in terms of action, and this is Crowther 2018, there are 4 different dimensions where we can work as far as adult education is concerned. I will bring in some detail in the next slide. There is activism, there is participation, there is liberation, there is reframing. So depending on other commitments, depending on your location, your present location, you enter. So there are different entry points into adult education for social change. And these are 4 possibilities, 4 entry points where you can enter as far as adult education is concerned. I know it's a bit small, okay, but these are basically the role of the educators here vis-a-vis the different entry points that I was talking about. So in terms of activism, for example, and that is where I am basically involved in, given my other commitments, my commitment in general over the years has been to create public space for discussion, okay, providing counter-information and promoting debate and analysis. That has been, by and large, my role over the years, the role of the activist educator, occupying public spaces, creating happenings, creating moments, creating public spaces. Why? Because obviously there is the need for promoting counter-information. So this is how I align my academic life with my activist life, using research for communal purposes, using research for transformative purposes. So it's not any research, but it's committed research, okay? Producing research which counters okay, the official knowledge, the official discourse. But obviously, I need spaces to do that. So it's not just promoting research in conferences with my little group called academics, but this commitment towards the public. The concept of the academic as a public intellectual that we spoke about. You know, I could have sat in my office, produced the research, written it as I did, okay, disseminated in conferences and academic realms, and full stop. Nobody's going to touch me, okay, as a professor. But no, I've moved out of the office, I've moved out of university and creating, you know, spaces where people can engage, people, okay, common people, I mean, can engage with my research. And that is another commitment of mine, popularizing research, okay? Not using the language, the flowery language of the academic, which I can anytime, any moment, but popularizing the language of research. And that's where we can engage then with the public. So that is the adult educator committed to social change as an activist. But there are other roles, as you see, participation, liberation. That is something that I do intermittently, walking into the communities, disadvantaged communities, and engaging with communities with the purpose of liberation, consciousness, okay? So poor communities, old people's communities, children where obviously have a history of disadvantage, walk in there, okay, create happenings, etc., with the idea of, you know, finally doing some action on the, with them. And then there is the reframing social justice. So these are 4 different entry points, 4 different possibilities where the adult educator for social change can work and can interact with, okay? And that's basically it, and I thank you for your attention. So maybe there are questions, perhaps, yeah? Any questions? Yeah?
I have no questions, but I wanted to mention that you're the first educator for mentioning person as first place as a protagonist.
Yeah, oh, and I thank you for that. I thank you for that. Obviously, it's a compliment, but it's something that we need to worry about, you know? And we need to question and interrogate, okay? So that is a very important, you know, point that you're making. Thank you for that. More questions and statements, yeah?
So one contradiction that I find in your speech was
Yeah.
that in the beginning you mentioned that it's important for us to so-called choose a side.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end you say that it's important to do things in the collective.
Mm-hmm.
So if the community and the collective is smaller, then like how do you divide like the community into half again?
Okay. Now, by choose a side, I meant choose a moral compass, okay? So choosing a side does not mean that you enter a community with a predetermined idea about the community. So I don't see the contradiction there. Choosing a side, okay, making an option means that you obviously, you have to choose your morality, okay, you have to choose your ethical compass, okay, and obviously choose a side means choosing to with whom you want to work, basically. I have limited time, so I've made my choices where I want to apply my time. And I apply my time with the most disadvantaged, okay, of my society. What we refer to as the preferential option, you know, for the poor. So that's what I meant by making options. That's what I meant by making decisions. That's what I meant by, you know, choosing a moral and ethical compass. Okay? So knowing that I have limited time, okay, I choose with whom I want to work. Okay? So that is one choice. But the other choice is basically the ideological choice, the moral choice, the ethical choice, okay, of how I want to read the world. These are all choices that we have to make. Otherwise, we cannot, you know, make other choices which are of a practical, logistical, you know, nature. So making choices does not mean entering, you know, entering the community with a predetermined choice. Obviously, I'm not kidding myself. I have made my choices, and those choices will show in my interaction, okay, with the community. Okay? Because I respect the community, that does not mean that anything goes within the community. Okay? We cannot tolerate the intolerable. I'm not for racism, that if there is racism within the community, I have to flag it, and I have to challenge it. So these are the choices that I made. So in the name of, dialogue, which we will mention tomorrow, dialogue does not mean a laissez-faire, pedagogy, where anything goes, where we can tolerate anything in the name, of dialogue, freedom of speech, etc. There needs to be, okay, challenging, interrogation, questioning, etc. And that questioning reflects my moral choices, my ethical choices. So in my interaction with the community, yes, I enter that interaction with a set and a frame of mind. And I don't see that as a contradiction. I have no pretensions that in my interaction with the community I'm being objective or neutral. Neutrality is a non-committal stance. And that is not acceptable from my point of view, okay, from an ethical point of view and from a moral point of view. Okay, so I think I've started with that. Education, any education is not neutral, is not innocent. So we better be aware of who we are, because that is the only way we can enter with some kind of honesty any community, call it learning or practical community. Yes?
I have a question which relates to this question.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
At what moment do you, and how do you question your students with this, which are you? Because I mentioned that when starting with the course, then it is very, very dangerous to
Yes.
ask this kind of.
Yes. That is a very important point, which I will obviously come back to it tomorrow when we do FREIR. There are lots of, obviously, situations where, because my students will be coming from 16 years of socialization into transmission, okay, they feel intimidated by dialogue. What Paulo Freire would refer to as fear of freedom. Okay, so you create the space and you get no voice. And that takes a lot of experience to bridge that gap. All right? Why? Because you need to create, a space marked by respect, which we obviously already refer, but it's also safety, and it's also trustworthiness. So there is trust, there is safety, there is respect. And that takes time, especially, as I said, with students coming from a tradition which is marked by, transmission, where they are not expected to speak, but just ask questions at the end. It's not easy to switch from 16 years of such a traditional pedagogy into a pedagogy marked by dialogue. So normally, it will take at least 2 to 3 sessions to realize that this professor is very different, perhaps, from others. And this is a professor who we can trust. This is a professor who we can dialogue with. And obviously, dialogue is seen then as a viable option, as a positive alternative to transmission. So yes, I've had several experiences where I got silence for my dialogue. But I'm prepared for that. In fact, I do have plan A and plan B. Okay, 2 ways of looking at the first lectures, first sessions, etc. Once I get that trust, once I get that safety, then people start, interacting. And I usually start with biographies, because that's the closest to their, reality. And then we start interrogating those biographies. But you cannot open up unless you feel safe, unless there is trust, unless you feel that this professor is serious about, dialogue. Especially in countries like ours, Estonia and Malta, which are very small, where you have the issue of intimacy, okay? So that is another added dimension as opposed to bigger countries where I taught. So intimacy could be even more dangerous, could add more danger, to the equation. So I totally understand, the situation here because I understand my country too. It's a small country. There is this intimacy factor, and it's more difficult for people to open up because of this intimacy. But yes, I do get silence quite frequently. But we manage to break that silence by developing, a community marked by trust and safety. Any other questions, statements? Yes, Phil. Hi, first of all.
Now you ruined this by showing intimacy between two of us. But if you frequently ask your students in the courses which side they pick, I think it's an interesting question. Do you have a statistics? Like, can you see how many people pick this is provocative, the right side, and is there change?
Okay, there is no right side to start with, okay? I'm not here to, impose anything on you, and I'm not self-righteous. So I'm proposing rather than imposing. So that is very clear, okay? This is only one way of visualizing, adult education, okay? Pick what you want from this. What I can say is that when we start with biographies, okay, obviously, I give them models to reflect on. So it's not just, okay, let's start thinking, So I present models, okay, to help them understand where they could be coming from, okay, in terms of curricular experiences. So now we're back to primary, for example, and secondary. So there's the transmission model, there is the interactive model, there is the, radical model, etc. So what I can tell you is that the first two lectures where they are interrogating themselves, these two sessions are very, very emotional. First of all, they realize where they are coming from, and in 16 years, no one stopped them to think about, the education system and what it did to them. That's one. Secondly, second phase would be much more emotional because they start realizing, okay, that who they are is by and large what the education system wanted them to be. And then they start realizing where their poor self-esteem, their fear of freedom is coming from. And that becomes really, really dangerous. Okay? I have no statistics, but I can tell you that, you will see over a period of 1 year that, these students are gaining more confidence, becoming more assertive, because they have the space to do that. I don't know what happens in other courses, but in my course, you suddenly see students challenging the professor, and that is exactly what I would want, okay? So I don't have statistics, I don't keep statistics, but I can tell you that transformation, you can see it in front of you. But it all starts from this basic interrogation. Where are we coming from? Understanding ourselves better, okay, as human beings, okay, as prospective educators, and of course as educators in communion with the other. So I do see transformation happening in front of my eyes, but obviously I do not have statistics, but I can tell you that, over the past 20 years, I've been doing this exercise for the past 20 years, the great majority of my students would identify themselves with the transmission model. How can you expect a democracy to flourish when you have thousands of students being socialized in domestication, in submission? This is the great contradiction of our countries. Aspirations for democracy, but then socialization in our schools, which is anything but democratic. That has been my experience in the past 20 years. And it's not just my country. Any other questions, statements, contradictions, challenging? Voices.
I actually have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't need to formulate it, but if you take a student as an intellectual,
Yeah.
and you have this trustworthy situation, how hard for you as a teacher is to put grades?
Okay. Now that's it. That, yeah.
Something that I have, if I consider, for example, to become a teacher, then at one moment you have to give a grade, and this grade part of this.
Okay. So, okay. I don't know what the situation here, but in my country, at least in my university, and because of my rank, higher rank, I have a lot of flexibility. So in terms of assessment, I never give exams, never. So it's all journal keeping, reflection, etc. Peer, okay, assessment, take home exams if I need to do exams. So there are many alternative ways other than sitting down and writing the exam for 2 hours to assess people. So my assessment is generally formative. So we talk about formative, but we never do it at university most of the time, So I do formative, and formative in the sense of keeping journals. So, my lectures, my sessions are like a journey. So you're moving together in this journey, but you are reflecting all the time. Don't forget, there is a commitment towards reflection. You cannot expect students to reflect at the end of a course when you have not created the environment where they can reflect face-to-face and reflect, after the session. This is the problem with universities. They expect a lot of their students, but they never give the skills or model, the skills to the students. Okay? And obviously students are losing, okay? Or rather, academics, generally speaking, lose their credibility when they are not consistent. So I'm trying to be consistent here. So I've done away with exams, okay? I brought in reflective, journals. It's formative, it's interactive, and it's a continuation of what we're doing in class. That's it. That's how I tackle, assessment at university.
They will rather get passed or not passed or some grade?
Yes, obviously the skills in reflection are not coverage and memory. They are other skills. Okay, it's not just writing skills, but it's reflective skills, it's analytical skills, the higher order skills that we talk about. See the consistency here? We are either for it or not. And we have to be ready to be different from other academics if we want to do things differently.